Welcome to the Divershefy Inspiring Leaders podcast. Our guest today is Kate Mason. Kate Mason is an author of Powerfully Likeable and your go-to guide for all things voice, visibility, and vibe. She helps women communicate with confidence without selling themselves short. Think of her as a strategic cheerleader, here to help you speak like you mean it and show up as your true self. She works with executives from tech startups to major global brands like Google, Microsoft, Netflix, and Uber on actionable skills to become leaders you wish to be and to communicate with power. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Sylvia.
I look forward to this conversation as I'm curious to hear about why you started this book. So let's tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to write Powerfully Likeable. What
Oh,
is
it's
your
a
background that led you to this place?
I guess in my later adulthood, I've been in very male-dominated companies and roles for a long time. But even before that, I was a world champion debater, which is sort of my nerdy origin story. And
Oh, I didn't
from
know
a
that.
pretty young age, yeah, from a pretty young age, I was again in all male teams and really it was brought into contrast for me that I had to do something different than the men around me were doing, or at least the young boys at the time were even doing. They would get praised for their gravitas and their presence. And I was told, oh, you're a bit too angry or it's a bit too much. So I was very aware of those tightropes from a pretty early age. And much to my disappointment slash, surprise, those tightropes exist in the workplace too. So I've sort of spent my career in tech companies, particularly really doubling down and trying to understand them a lot more. And that's what really the book has been born out of.
Yeah, so can you share some personal experience that made you realize that? That power and the cost of being likable at work?
I used to get a lot of I think for many years I went the other way. I thought, well, I will masculinize and I will be also strong and I will lose a lot of my perceived femininity, however you define that, right? Because that's how I'll fit in or that's how I'll succeed and grow. And in doing that, it felt very inauthentic to me. And at the same time, I would get lots of comments like, "Oh, it's so nice to see you, with your smile," or you always bring sort of good energy to a room. And I would think, no, those aren't the things I'm going for. I'm going for this masculine power. Doesn't everybody know? And over time, I realized that, my smile or my warmth or whatever, however you want to characterize it, was power, right? That it was something that people could conceptualize as they wanted me on a team or they wanted to promote me. The energy that I was bringing was not that sort of strong masculine energy, but it was myself, and actually that was what was getting me to the next level of things. And so I think reconceptualizing those things has been really helpful and quite interesting to me.
Yeah, see, I talk with a lot of women, and many have this struggle or had this struggle, at least at some time in their career, of
Mm,
trying to be more like men, simply
yes,
because they felt that their female traits that they were bringing to the table were not appreciated. But it's
yes.
interesting what you're saying is that in your relationship, in your company, it actually has started to show that these female traits were actually valuable to you. So your relationship to being likable has evolved.
Very much so. I mean, I think like likability gets a bit of a hard rap, doesn't it? Because we think it's like a backhanded compliment. But I actually think that like definitionally it means, do I like being in that person's orbit, right? Do I want to be around them? And when it comes to work, that's a very valuable thing to have, right? I want to bring that person onto my team. I want to go advocate for them. These are, I think, very core reasons why we succeed in a role or don't. So I feel like for me, certainly I've seen that when I've tried to perform something that I'm not, it's one, exhausting, but two, really unfulfilling because I never feel like I leave that interaction feeling somewhat empty. And I don't want anyone to leave interactions feeling empty. None of us do. So I think finding what's true to yourself and then being able to lean into that is where your power can really come from.
Yeah. So was there a specific turning point in your career where you decided, you're not gonna dim your light anymore, you're actually gonna not play it small, you actually really want to go for it? And how
Yeah,
does this affect your relationship with your voice and how you showed up?
it's a really good question. I for a long time thought these people in these rooms, they earn a lot, some of them are billionaires, right? I worked in Silicon Valley for a long time. They're older than me, they're more experienced than me, they have more money than me, they must know more than me, right? I think it's a really obvious, or at the time, it's a very obvious equation or assumption to make. And so for a long time, I would be somewhat deferential to them thinking, oh,
Mm.
they're probably the expert here. And I think it was over time, I'm not sure that there was a specific, aha moment, but it was over time. I realized more and more they were like, well, what do you think? Or what should we do? And I was realizing, oh, even though there are these hierarchical or power differences between us, what I'm telling you, I am the expert in what I've been brought here for, right? I'm not an expert in what you are, but you're not an expert in what I am. And I think that was a very, very liberating realization because I could unlock some of that fear or deference and actually realize, oh gosh, I was brought here to do my job. And I feel very good about what I can give and create in that space. So that was the moment where I thought, oh, great, I don't have to be an expert in everything. I literally just have to be able to focus on my own area of excellence. And that was a wonderfully liberating turning point.
Right. I mean, that is something I think we all are looking to get this point where we feel like we are valued for who we are, right?
Exactly.
For who we actually are at the core and not have to do or be something that we are actually not. And I think
Yes.
it's not just women. I think it's also men want that kind of being valued for who they actually are. But I think we women maybe
Yes.
have a harder time showing up as such because we feel it's not so valued in
Yes.
companies because it's more of a male dominated culture. So we have a little harder time getting there. But I think
I
it
also,
is a goal
yes.
to aspire for. Yes, please.
Yes, I was just sorry to cut you off. I was going to say, it reminds me, I think the particular female lens to that problem or that dilemma is that I think we need to know as much as everybody else in the room about all of their areas too. So I have a wonderful client who is a VP of business development, and she came to me and she said, I'm always the least technical person in the room. And if, everyone else has, computer science backgrounds. And I said, of course you're the least technical person. And she said, well, I hate that. I said, I can see why, right? That's frustrating. But you weren't brought in to be the most technical person in the room. You were brought in to be, in business development. And so while you have complementary skills, you don't need to be the expert in their vertical. And I think that's something that is a really nice, freeing thing to realize, rather than having the weight of that on my shoulders, like, oh God, do I need to go and get a CS degree, to do my job? And of course the answer is no, but it can feel like that sometimes.
Yes. So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. So now, for yourself, you wrote a book, and was that a
Mm.
challenge? And did it challenge your beliefs or your habits? And did you have to unlearn things? So writing a book is a big deal. I mean, I know a few authors, and they all said, it's like having a baby. You actually incubate it for like many months, and then
Yes.
you bring something to life. So, what's been your experience on writing the book?
It's definitely a child. It can be a troublesome child at times. But honestly, it was in many ways a real joy because I've been working in this space for so long. And the book is full of both my own experiences, but anecdotes of women that I coach, my friends, real life examples. I wanted it to be as actionable and practicable to really earn that place on someone's bedside table. Right? Because that's in my room, that's a very sacred space, right? It has to get there by a big process of elimination. And so I thought it has to be immediately useful and be readable. You're wanting to spend time with it. And so once I realized that's how I like to read, it was easier to write for that woman. I had sort of that woman in my mind thinking, I hope this can be useful. So there was some hardship in that you've really got to sit down and put your mind to it, but there was also a lot of joy. And I think that was for me the I didn't so much have to unlearn things as remember that I do love writing and I love being in that space of explaining things and taking my time with an explanation. So that was quite joyful.
Great, good. This is good to know. And is there a particular chapter or a particular idea that you feel is special for you?
Oh, that's like asking me to choose amongst my children, Sylvia. Um,
Yes.
I I think one that resonates a lot with people when I teach it. I have this idea of imposing syndrome. So not imposter syndrome, which I think we've all heard much about, but the idea of imposing syndrome is that many of us, and I think this is particularly for women, find it very hard to make an ask when we perceive that we might be making an imposition on someone, so imposing on someone, whether that's asking for time, for resources, for energy. We'll say things like, it'll just take 2 seconds, or don't worry, no worries if not, right? We minimize, we hedge, we disclaim. There's a whole lot of behaviors. And it's been interesting because even in the process of writing a book, you have to now ask people, hey, could you put a blurb or could you recommend me or could you? And I find myself noticing, oh, yes, these are asks. These are hard to do. But when we see those behaviors and see maybe what might be undermining, it's very powerful because we can work out, this is just an ordinary ask. This is okay. And I can hold that space and make it without concern.
So confidence is a big theme in the book. And what are some of the surprising myths that you bust about confidence? And one chapter is entitled Kill Your Confidence. So that was surprising to me. Can you unpack what that looks like in real life?
It's a great question. Confidence to me is one of the things that is most given out as feedback. You need to be more confident. You need to develop executive presence. We have all heard it or given that feedback to somebody. And I think it's the most difficult or sometimes counterproductive advice to give somebody. And the reason is that we kind of know what confidence looks like, right? That we know the outcome, but we don't know the process necessarily to get there. And so it's a little bit like saying someone, you should just be healthier, right? You should be fitter. We know what that might look like, but oftentimes the pieces to get there are opaque or they're really personal to us, right? We have particular inclinations and preferences. So in some ways, I think I'm very against the idea of telling people that they have confidence because it's so inactionable. But worse than that, I think it gets us in our heads because suddenly I'm in an interaction and we're having a great meeting and I'm thinking, is this confident? Am I sitting confident? Am I saying this confidently? And I'm opening all these mental tabs in my mind that are draining energy, from my primary conversation. And suddenly I'm outside of something useful. I'm not being connected. I'm not being in that relationship. And I'm distracted. I'm pulled out of this sort of external metric. And I think that can be really harmful for people when they get in their own head about it. So I propose in the book a number of strategies to say it's much more important to be grounded and present and connected such that you are building those relationships and really present and of service in that moment rather than that sort of externalized inward looking metric that can be really, really damaging. And I think when you make that shift, suddenly, ironically, or maybe counterintuitively, you're naturally more confident, right? Because you're suddenly present and there and ready to show up, and you're not sort of worried and self-conscious. So to me, self-consciousness and confidence actually unavoidably go together, which is really unfortunate. And if we think about being present and connected, there's a real lack of self-consciousness there. Suddenly you're just in the moment and you can be in flow. So that's the idea that I really get into in that chapter, which I think, again, people find in doing workshops and talking to people I coach a very, very helpful frame to get out of something that has felt quite burdensome, or externalized and felt rather a lot more generative.
That's interesting because one of the things that I do feel training programs can help with is getting more confident from the inside out. Not because somebody
Mhm.
tells you to be confident, but because you know you're capable. You
Yes,
know how to lead. You know how to do this, that, or the other thing. So that
yes,
confidence is coming from within, right? It's
yes,
not some external confidence. So I think that is still valuable, but it's not some, but I agree with you. If you constantly focus or worry about being confident, then, that is a distraction. This
exactly.
confidence can be built from knowledge, from understanding, from knowing yourself. And this is what part of our training programs do also. They're leadership
Mm,
training programs, and they help women specifically to get more confident in themselves and also in their skills. It's not just about themselves, but about what they're able to do, how they're able to speak, how they show up, how they are present. So I think
yes.
I very much agree with you on that. It's just that the word confidence can have, two meanings, outside seen and from the inside coming.
Yes. And by the way, I'm very much in favor of an inside out confidence, right? Like, of course, I think we're both in service of that. And maybe the title "Kill Your Confidence" is a little provocative on that count,
Yes.
but the idea I think is to not feel burdened by someone else's expectation or a boss giving that feedback. I've had people come to me saying, "I'm here because I've been told I need to work on my confidence," and in hearing that, it's like snuffed out the light. It snuffed out that fledgling embers of confidence, which is, I think, exactly the opposite of the intended purpose of that feedback in the first instance. So wherever I meet someone, I'm always trying to build it back up. But as you say, from the inside out, not from the outside in.
Yes. So, great. Thank you so much for explaining that. So there's another provocative term that you're using in the book that caught my eye, which was called failure privilege.
Mm.
And I would like to hear what does that mean, and why does it matter? I mean, what is it?
Yes, it's a great question. You're a moth to the flame, Sylvia. You've gone to two big ones that I'm really passionate about. Um, Failure privilege is what I call the idea that in society we can see that often men can publicly fail and rehabilitate from that failure. So we see, say, for example, a founder, their business goes bankrupt, and a couple of years later, they're on the PR train, rehabilitating their image, and surprise, surprise, they've raised a lot more money or they've opened a new company, and how wonderful, right? And in a very masculine pattern, we see that that failure is just a rite of passage. Of course, that's how they grow and that's how they move forward in the world, and nobody really holds it against them. And I think we'll see true equality when women have that same failure privilege, and we don't quite now. So that's the depressing takeaway, right? Which is we're not quite there yet. But I really pick it up and say, if we're not there yet, how do we exist within that framework in a way that doesn't feel like it's going to hold over us, or that we don't have a failure safety net? Because invariably we will fail at something. And I think the more we try to avoid failure, the more we're probably not trying, or we're not, putting our hand up for that job, or saying yes to a difficult promotion, or all the things that can feel scary and have a risk of that. I would still want people to be able to take, and women specifically, to be able to take those risks. And I believe over time we will develop a similar sort of badge of honor of failure, rather than it being, the anathema to our beliefs or our self-identity.
I'm glad you're actually calling that out because I meet a lot of women, and I also have in my own life,
Mm.
this fear of failing is actually very real.
Of
But if you
course.
can name it, and you can say, look, men fail a lot, and especially male entrepreneurs also, right? But we women, we try to create a company and we don't want to fail. We want it to
Yes.
succeed. The first one, it has to succeed. It's our baby. We love it to death and it has to succeed, right? So that
Yes.
to be conscious of the fact that, okay, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but there is a privilege that men have that they are just more maybe not accommodated to failing, but maybe just more eligible to fail, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And maybe it doesn't give the same black card or, black mark against them as it might do a woman, or that we perceive that to be the case. And I would love to see that equalize over time. I think we're on the way to that, but we're certainly not there yet. And so I think, just as you say, pulling it out and being aware of it is part of the process, and then deciding what we're going to do about it, right?
Yeah,
Do we decide to never try? I mean, that's an option, right? But I don't think it's a very fulfilling one for many of us who still do want to push the envelope a little.
great. Thank you so much. So we're coming to the last question already.
Sure.
What's one simple and powerful communication shift that listeners can make today? What is it that you would recommend people do start doing?
Wow, that's a very, very hard question for me because I have so many come to mind. I think the best thing that you could do today would be to know that your energy, the way that you're showing up, is contagious. And we don't think about contagion in these ways often. We think about it in terms of diseases, but your energy is contagious, which is to say, if you come with a really angry or anxious or upset energy to a room or an interaction, people will feel it and often will feel unsettled by it. But if you bring a positive energy or a happy, even energetic energy, oftentimes you'll find that the room can shift in your favor. And that's particularly important if you're trying to persuade or influence folks. So it's not to say to mask whatever's going on, but I think in some degree it's to be very cognizant of what you're bringing and how that might lift up everybody else, to rally them around your cause, to get buy-in for what you're doing, to feel a sense of excitement, is something that we don't often think about putting it on my to-do list. And sometimes we're so invested in, like, I've got to get through these three things in the meeting, that the energy is the last thing on our mind. But I think that's one of the most subtle and powerful things you could probably do today. And I'd encourage listeners to experiment with it and see and observe what's happening when they vary their own energy.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful talking with you. Thank you for joining for the Divershefy Inspiring Leaders podcast. And we look forward to having you for a fireside chat on August 29th, 2025, on a similar topic. We are exploring, discussing together, and talking in a roundtable discussion about the topics that you're bringing up in your book. And we look forward to having you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sylvia. It's been a pleasure.